Hey guys and girls, how's it going? Hope you guys had a great week. So I'm back today with another video. Now this one is kind of an opinion piece that was inspired by an article that I read a few days that I thought was extremely interesting, and I wanted to talk about it and see what your take is on it. So I'm sure many of you have noticed that 2017 has been an excellent year for Japanese games. Really the trend started at the end of last year in November with the release of Final Fantasy 15. Since then, there has been an influx of Japanese games that have surprised many people and many critics and have done very, very well in Western mainstream markets. Now, if we have a look at that, at the beginning of the year in January, we had the release of Kingdom Hearts 2.8 Final Prologue Chapter, which is sort of getting us hyped and setting the scene for the much anticipated Kingdom Hearts 3. In February, Nioh was released and was received very positively and did very, very well. Then in March, we had probably one of the main contenders for Game of the Year this year, which was Zelda Breath of the Wild. Also, Nier Automata surprised many people when that landed in March. And then in April, Persona 5 hit the scene, and the reactions to that game have been amazing. Now, all these games have done very well, especially when we compare them to many of the AAA titles that came out around the same time. Now, if we look into a little bit of detail in terms of the critical response that they've received and the scores they have come in at, for example, Nioh came in with a Metacritic score of 88 and a user score of 8.7. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild achieved an amazing Metacritic score of 97 and a user score of 8.3. Nier Automata got a Metacritic score of 88 and a user score of 8.8, and Persona 5 came out of nowhere and got a Metacritic score of 93 and a user score of 9.1. Now, when we compare these to other big AAA titles that came out around that time, the only one really that did very, very well was Horizon Zero Dawn. If we look at some of the other titles that came out, for example, For Honor, which came out in February, that got a Metacritic score only of 78 and a user score of 6.3, which is quite low. Then Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands, that got a Metacritic score of 71 and a user score of 6.0. And then, of course, we had the much anticipated Mass Effect Andromeda, which got a Metacritic score of 70 and a user score of 4.7. The reactions to Andromeda, as we know, have been incredibly divisive. And while I don't think it deserves a user score of 4.7, and I think that is a little harsh, it definitely didn't live up to expectations, and it didn't live up to the standards that we were expecting from BioWare. Now, it's quite interesting to see that these Japanese games have done so well, especially when we look at how little news coverage and advertising and marketing was done for these games. They certainly didn't have as much financial backing in the West. If you go anywhere at the moment, on billboards, to the cinema, on TV, there are adverts everywhere, and they are promoting games like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, Mass Effect Andromeda, Horizon Zero Dawn. You can see advertising for these games everywhere in the West, but there's very little on games like Nier Automata and Persona 5, but they have still done exceptionally well, and that's because they rely a lot on reviews of those games for people to go out and buy them. Now, my question here really is, why is that? Why are these Japanese games doing so well in the West at the moment? And I think there are many reasons for that. But I think one of the reasons that these Japanese games are doing so well is that they're offering something new, a breath of fresh air. The Western gaming market at the moment, in my opinion, is stagnated. A lot of games are using the same tropes, the same techniques. A lot of games in the West now are always online or full open world games. And that means that they're using a lot lot of the same old tried and tested approaches. So for example, while Horizon Zero Dawn was a fantastic game, the main character of Aloy, the world was exceptional, was really interesting. Even that itself had many techniques that we were familiar with and we were kind of gotten a little bored of. You know, you still had to climb towers to open up the map. Your map was still littered with lots of collectibles and fetch quests and side quests and those sorts of things. Developers like Ubisoft and BioWare are using the same sorts of techniques when they are producing these games. And I think the problem is that many Western gamers are becoming a little bored of it. You know, it's too familiar. It's too safe. We want something a little different. We want characters that are different, stories that are different. And, you know, honestly, I think we're becoming a little bored of those games. And it's for those reasons that games like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands didn't do well. Yes, it's a different setting, but effectively it's like The Division, only with a different skin. It's very similar, and we've been there, we've seen it, and we know what to expect. We know that it's going to be a big open world map, but it's not going to have much story. It's not going to have much character development. We're not going to get to see that. So I think many Western gamers are kind of tired of it, and I think these Japanese games are offering something a little bit new, a little bit more refreshing. I think Western gamers as well are also kind of tired of all the really dodgy marketing techniques and tactics being used. We've sort of seen through it, all that hype, all that advertising and support that these producers are giving, like, for example, The Division, like Destiny, like No Man's Sky. There was so much marketing and so much money spent into this marketing that I think a lot of us are starting to realize that we can't always trust this marketing. We can't always trust the hype surrounding it. And more often than that, the game is not going to live up to our expectations. And unfortunately, that is a sad fact at the moment. So I think a lot of people are not listening to that marketing, not listening to that hype, and they are more likely now to wait until a review comes out before they go ahead and pick up and play that game. And I'm exactly the same. You know, I haven't gone out and bought games or pre-ordered games when they first came out. The only exception this year has probably been Mass Effect Andromeda, because I'm a massive fan of the Mass Effect series. That is the only game this year that I pre-ordered. I didn't pre-order any of the other games, bar maybe Horizon Zero Dawn, because I got the collector's edition. But a lot of other games this year, I've waited until reviews have come out, and I picked it up obviously in the sale or when it's been a little bit cheaper. I think as well, a lot of these Japanese games, there is a lot of advertising out there and there are things out there, but you know, you have to go look for them. They're on Twitter or they're on YouTube, and YouTube can be used in a very good way for cheap kind of free marketing. As well, I think a lot of these Japanese games are starting to cater to Western audiences. They're starting to introduce new ideas and new things that make them more accessible to the West, because they offer some degree of familiarity, but also something that's different that grabs our attention. If we look at Zelda Breath of the Wild, for example, that's introduced some new techniques as well. So it's for the first time, it's a massive open world. It's the biggest Zelda game that exists. And also they've introduced for the first time as well, voice acting in much of the cutscenes, which didn't exist in previous Zelda titles, and that's something that's kind of always there in a lot of Western RPG games. So I think the Japanese developers, like for example the developers of Nioh, have been very clever to make the gameplay seem familiar in terms of those gamers that might really like the Dark Souls series, but they have put some slight twists on it in terms of style and characters, and the story obviously being set in ancient sort of Edo, Japan. And that's really interesting. Persona 5 as well, it's like nothing many of us have seen, and it looks again really interesting. So I think Japanese game developers are doing a very good job at the moment of trying to improve what they do, but also innovate and make it a little bit more accessible to the West. And maybe that's why these games have become so popular. I think the difference as well is in the quality of the games when they are being released initially at release. A lot of Japanese games, these game developers take years and years to make these games. Look at Final Fantasy 15. Look at The Last Guardian. These games were 10 years in the making. 10 years to make a game. Can you imagine EA or Ubisoft or Activision giving a developer 10 years to make a game? It just would not happen. In the West now, you've got games, like the Assassin's Creed series, that had game coming out every single year, a new Call of Duty every single year. I think we're getting tired of it. I think we're getting tired of these games being released in an unfinished state. And really now when a game comes out, it isn't the perfect version. It isn't the way it should be. Often these developers have to bring out patches further down the line. So when you're doing a review, when it first comes out, that game is unfinished. It's not in the state that it should be. So a lot of these Japanese games are being produced with more quality and in a more finished final state. So when we are playing them, we are playing the best version of that game. But when a lot of these Western games, there's a lot of cutbacks in terms of financial costs. There's a lot of pressure on developers for timeframes and producing these games to a certain deadline. Now a lot of developers and producers think it's okay to release a day one patch that's like 4 or 5 gigabytes in size. They're asking us to pre-order the game. They're asking us to fork down £40 on a season pass before that content has even been produced. It's become absolutely ridiculous, the West, in terms of the gaming market. And I think gamers right now, they're getting a little tired of it, a little fed up of it, of these games being released in that state. And I think that was the reason why there was so much controversy around Mass Effect Andromeda, because the Mass Effect series, while it's not been perfect, generally when the game's been released, it's been released, in a good state, in a finished state. And I think all these glitches and all these performance bugs and frame rate issues and, poor facial animations and dead eyes that we're getting in Mass Effect Andromeda, it was really glaring, especially when that game had a 5-year development cycle. So I think Western gamers are getting a little bit more picky in terms of what games they're playing. And the Japanese games have really fallen into a market that's looking for something new and fresh. So it's very interesting, really, at the moment. I'd say at the moment there are two Japanese games that are definite contenders for Game of the Year, and that is Zelda Breath of the Wild and Persona 5. I think the only other major competitor to that is probably Horizon Zero Dawn. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of 2007 spans out. But what I will say is whatever happens, whether these games come from Japan, whether they come from the West, wherever, I don't care. All I care about is that these games are good, and there have been a lot of very, very good games that have come out in 2017 already. So my expectations for 2017 are high. I'm hoping we're going to get a lot more really good games coming out in the future. So I'm optimistic and I'm positive, but I do think that a lot of Western developers can learn from what's happening at the moment in terms of the Japanese games coming out and sort of dominating the market. And I think that's really good. I think competition in any form, in any way, is always good because it pushes developers to push the boundaries in what they do, creatively speaking, and also perhaps it might send a message to producers to actually don't waste your money as much on advertising. Put that money into the developers. Give them time to work in these games so that they can produce them to the best of the ability, and listen to your fans, do quality control, listen to them, listen to what they want. And then obviously look at building that into your games. But anyway, those are my general thoughts at the moment. Let me know what you guys think on this topic. Are there any of these games that you have played? What were your thoughts on them? Are there any games that have come out from Japan that you haven't played, but you're definitely going to pick up? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Which games do you think are the contenders for Game of the Year this year at the moment, which have obviously come out at the beginning of this year? Anyway, I hope you guys are having a great weekend. Take care, and as always, happy gaming.